Something weird.
Talking. Talking.
Let me. There we go. There we go. I don't know where everybody else is. How's your day going, Luke?
It's going okay. Or hitting some nitro. I don't know what's going on with the nitro
We're live,
difference or
so you
something.
know. Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's going okay. I'm just debugging some VSR stuff, content encoding.
Cool. Cool. Let me quickly pull up the agenda that I had for today. Share this with you. Should I share the live stream as well? Well, it might be a short call today if it's just you and me. I had put on here the two things at least, or really it's like one thing. And I think Wes had said he was going to drop by because he had a couple things he wanted to talk about.
I thought Wes said he was going to miss today.
Oh, okay. So then that's the opposite of what I heard. So I put the remediation workflows that folks would go through given the more recent supply chain attacks that we've seen. And I
Yeah.
walk through kind of the different package manager locations for, I think I talked to you about this, about where you would essentially look in individual stores or caches essentially for whether or not you might be compromised. Um, which was a good exercise just personally to be like across all the different tools that I happen to even install, right? There's no standard tooling I have. And there might be some security product out there that tries to essentially investigate all these caches themselves. Although, depending on how, you know, like NPM stores its cache, like I think it'd be very odd for them to like discover potentially the package software looking in like a cache entry, right? So, so it's kind of At least I found it to be pretty problematic in terms of how how you try to track down all these potential places where a vulnerable or malicious piece of software could be living. So just to throw it out there, that was the one thing that I wanted to bring up. And then, like, obviously, the potential mitigation strategies that folks have been using to date, in terms of like using log files, obviously, is the number one, or pinning well known or good versions of packages. It's kind of like the default state, steady state. But PNPM last week obviously introduced like a minimum release age, and there's also everybody's been asking about how npm's before config works so that people can give themselves a bit of a cooldown. I know some companies have asked us if we're going to add a cooldown or some kind of like buffer config to Volt. So that was kind of like generally the topics, are like kind of like things I want to kind of go deep on. But I'm not sure if you have any ideas on that, but or thoughts.
No, I mean, I think it makes sense as a config. I think it's something that is hard to have a default on, because it's a lot of like, it bakes in a lot of assumptions about how and you and your team like to work. So I like to have it be configurable. And yeah, and I saw you did post about this before somewhere, but like npm does have before, but the hard part about it is it just only takes a static date. And so it's, if you want a rolling date, it just requires more work. So I think having something, I think it makes sense to have a config and allow it to be some sort of rolling, or actually both, like a rolling one, and it takes a static date, because the static date is useful for non-security reasons, mostly debugging, trying to do point in time reproduce, not capital R reproduce, but just reproductions of bugs, or bug reports that people do in issues and stuff. So I think it makes just sense to have it as a config, and I think the ecosystem will decide and experiment with like what defaults should be. But um, I'd be hesitant to have them to be like everyone should do a week, because if everyone does a week, then it could slow down our ability to find this stuff. But I do think things have changed since npm has introduced before, because I remember there's some RFCs that um, folks were asking for this back in, maybe when I first joined the npm team, like 2021 or so. And I think just the landscape of security tooling is a lot different then, or a lot different now than it was then. So I can buy more of the argument now that we are finding this stuff faster. So, and there's teams dedicated to doing this and projects dedicated to doing this. And so even if like, so maybe I'm convincing myself out of like having it as a default at this point, but having it be a default for a package manager still feels like, um, heavy handed. But if we are finding, like, I think maybe 5 years ago, if you made the default in npm 1 week, everyone would just wait a week to get the latest vulnerability. And that would kind of provide safe haven for developer, or for malware authors to do this stuff, maybe because it'd be like, oh, like, it's often easier to find stuff minutes after it was first published, people seem to do so. But
Y-
now that there's like dedicate socket and teams dedicated to finding this stuff, I think it makes more sense.
Yeah, like end users and consumers are not the ones pulling from the replication feed and tracking
Yeah.
malware, right? And the only time that this really is a problem, because we've created sort of a patchwork of safety mechanisms, and it's truly like defense in depth at this point, is when somebody's installing something that they haven't seen before, or they're updating, right? So like usually lock files, like I said, would protect you, or you would have captured something at that point in time a while back, right? And so like most of your CI systems aren't the CI systems aren't the machines that are getting, it's compromised, it's usually the developer machine, right? If it's an update or a fresh install, like installing something net new, that's going to change the log file and reach out and grab, latest latest piece of software. So I think that it's surprising, the number of packages that have been compromised, but it could have been, I feel like it could have been way worse. And so like I do think that, yeah, I don't know if it's a config necessarily. Like I guess that would be one thing that I'd ask you about your thoughts on in terms of us supporting some kind of gate or policy, default gate or policy. Because I know that's how I treat this. This is essentially like a policy. And we do today in the selector language have a published selector, which you can set essentially relative dates. So you can say before than, greater than, equals, less than, greater, less than, equals, certain dates or specific dates. But we also do not, as far as I know, have a relative value supported. So yeah, like I'd be interested to see like what we think. Oh, I see. Poor Roy was trying to get in this whole time.
Hello,
I
hello.
apologize.
No.
I could see us supporting a relative pseudo selector alongside either the published pseudo selector somehow. And then using that as a gate, either once we have full support for selectors and modifiers somehow, or separately as policies, separately as a completely different API surface. Yeah, because then it's totally configurable, right? We don't even set a default ourselves. We don't have to set a default, but if you want to, you can. That's the one complaint some folks had with before is in order to get that relative behavior, you have to set it on each install, or you have to do some kind of like hacky. What I was sharing with folks is like putting in your like CSHRC or your bash RC files to, get it to work relatively every time you spawn a new terminal shell or whatever. So yeah. For Jason and Roy who just joined, we're talking about the recent compromises, and I'll share, I think in the chat I shared the notes, but I essentially went through this week and tried to enumerate if I was an end user that thought I was compromised, which I fingers crossed I haven't been, and I have not been based on all of my research, and I hope nobody else on this call has been. What were the actions I would take to investigate whether or not I have potentially a malicious package? And this plays into some recent things that we've been working on, ships that Roy, I know you just published. But like, what would be the process for me to essentially enumerate and make sure I've checked in all the different dark corners in my system to make sure that I'm not compromised. And so I did that and essentially put down what I do for npm, pnpm, yarn, bun, and also us. And it's a lot of places to look. There's a lot of caching that happens in these. That's how we try to be performant, is like by having many layers of caching, but it also potentially makes us very vulnerable, right? Because now our caches potentially are poisoned or a different, you've cleaned up one place, but your cache is still poisoned. And so like when you go to install your next project, if you didn't flush something out of that global cache, your system could reinstall something that actually isn't even on the registry anymore, right? So there's some thought we should probably put towards how people do, a proper cleanup, or how we protect folks that are maybe even in those or using those other package managers, right? Like we have a pretty good sense of this, like building the benchmark suite, we get a good sense of how to configure all the other package managers. Having been in this space for a very long time, we understand how all the package managers work, and we're some of the few that I think know where they're putting all their they're caching everything, right? So is there a way for us to like make it easier for you to like quickly clean up and find if you're compromised? I don't know. It's like a question I'm posing to essentially y'all, and like what should we do to make it easier so that we know that we're not owned, right? Like what were the steps you guys took in the last week or two to make sure you weren't owned?
Well, maybe I can start with the because that's kind of has been my work for the last week or so here, right? Like with the host selector. So, but yeah, that's kind of like was my frustration. Like I should have you know, a way in a couple of seconds, not writing, an entire suite of tooling myself for my specific projects, but like just a really like just takes me a second, write a command and I can answer that question, right? So that's kind of what motivated me to jump into this adventure of working with creating this host selector that basically allows the query syntax to jump around different contexts now. And we have one special context we call the local, which is kind of an aggregation of all your local projects. It basically respects the same logic as the dashboard right now on how you configure your project. So whatever you configure to show on your UI dashboard, that's what we're able to monitor with that special host local syntax, right? Maybe you can also send here in the chat, Darcy, like column host parentheses local, like just the example of the syntax, right? Yeah. So exactly. So I can tell, one, I can take just like a few milliseconds to type. This is going to reach out for socket security alerts. That's what the data we use to track these alerts. And it's going to take, a few seconds to fetch that info and going to let me know, okay, have I been pwned, right? Like, do I need to start taking action right now to clean up all my tokens? And so this has been a major one for me. Yeah, kind of looking at all the recent incidents, right? Like, I really want to have at least a way to tell, okay, have we been affected? But yeah, I know we have way more ideas on how to prevent that, but this is at least a way to tell, okay, after the fact, what can we do about it?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to like look if you're being owned, but we do need to consider how to even improve this for previous Volt projects, right? Because I think that this only works or applies to new Volt projects, right? So it's only going forward. And also, how do we apply this to maybe other projects that we have not installed? So I know we've talked about synthetically creating or making changes to use the ideal graph internally for the Volt GUI. And I'm not sure if we could also do it for the query to essentially scan. Let's say we've picked up projects like an NPM project or a PNPM project or a Bund project. If there's a way to essentially generate the ideal graph for those projects as well, and be able to also scan those projects, I think would be a major win. And that might also alleviate the problem or the bug I found, at least, like not bug, but like the gotcha I found this morning with like not being able to scan old projects and requiring us to reinstall or blow away node modules, right? So just thinking out loud in terms of like, how do we protect more than just the projects that are using Volt right now? Like, is that even possible? Or can we at least provide with the observability tooling? Like, we maybe won't be able to protect users if they're not using Volt, obviously, for their projects to gate the installation, but we can at least tell you that we can see in your dependency graph or the graph that we would have reified for you, that we would have, found that you have these dependencies, right?
Yeah, the only thing with the ideal that where my mind goes is like, maybe with if we're building ideal graphs on the fly, right, like to render for different type of projects using different package managers, maybe we'll be on the process. We'll be getting the malware to the user machines, right? Like, maybe not necessarily.
Also, it has to be
running it.
virtual. Yeah, it has to be
Yeah.
completely virtual. So I think the gotcha that you've told me before is definitely with Git dependencies
Yes.
and bundle
And
dependencies.
remote.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and so like those are ones that we could basically opt. We should
Maybe.
be I've always thought that those should be opted out of by default, anyways. Like I feel like
Right.
they're kind of like similar to, and I think PNPM has started to call them built dependencies or build dependencies. So
Right.
any dependency that has a requirement for like a post install script or something to like build itself, it's
Yeah.
not fully like distributing like a fully consumable package, and it needs to be somehow built. That's I think Git or repos are in that category of like maybe we should refuse to install them by default, and you have to like opt into like an override or a modifier to explicitly allow them, or a policy that explicitly allows them, and you become the owner then of those things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I would think of maybe a configuration option, but maybe have it as a modifier might actually be way better. But yes, it would be very nice to explore. But at least we should start with we should start with an opt-in way of
I
doing
think
that, right?
I think we, by default, and this is me being even more aggressive about these things, is we kill install scripts by default, and we kill anything that we know requires install scripts.
Install scripts, yeah, but then okay, yeah, maybe should we subscribe to that allow list that I think PNPM Bun are using?
I think that's a slippery slope, right? Like one, it's not something we control.
Yeah, I know
If a bad actor somehow is like starts to treat that as like the blessed trusted list, it becomes a target list, right? So then it's like, oh, this like if I can compromise one of these 100 packages, like it becomes like a well-known list of who to go compromise, right? Because you know that your post install scripts, so it almost becomes, you know.
What is the solution then to getting the projects that need to run right install?
I mean, I have always felt that a big problem here is that installation is treated as a one-step process when it's really a two-step process, and so there's no immutable, reproducible, isolated installation process and like graph resolving process, apart from like the building of packages. Like if the individual package needs to be built, then it needs to be a singleton, basically. Like it should not come along with it more dependencies that need to be pulled in, right? So that's where, like, if that's a major problem, I think, today, where it's like they are not treated like that. We allow for a Git repository to basically be and bundled dependencies to be installed, and we run potentially any arbitrary script that could also modify or change like things on disk during the installation process. So it's which I find just to be an insane thing. It's you should have kind of a two-step process. So that's my personal belief, is like we make install truly just isolated to doing that thing that we can control, and you can run a separate process to build, right? And this is kind of how projects work today anyways. Like you get watch modes and like dev modes in a bunch of like developer tools, which kind of hide the build and deploy process, right? Like, so most projects, when you think about them being built, they usually have also like a separate deployment thing. This is like the opposite, right? Like consuming and building, or building and then consuming, is kind of like what that looks like for us as a package manager. So yeah, I think that you have to do the resolution first, and make that like immutable. And then if there's a separate like build run that needs to happen, that's great. And if you want to opt into like do them both, then you're taking on that risk, right? So it becomes an opt-in for not an opt-out, right? Like ignore scripts historically has been the thing that folks have said, hey, you protect yourself by turning off this like dangerous behavior. Well, how about we have the dangerous behavior off by default, and I can opt into the, you know,
Yeah, like an allow
dangerous behavior.
scripts.
Allow scripts. And yeah, and so to your point about should we look at the list that has been created of those like well-known packages that we know are kind of have good authors, they're well maintained, they're popular. Let's not like, you know, like that's what's being maintained by YAR and PNPM. And I think even Bun is now using it potentially. I would say no, likely not, because I think what would be more powerful is you could use a selector from our side, right? Like if you want to allow scripts, you could allow scripts using a query selector, right? So you could bake in some heuristic. Like we could basically, if we wanted to, we could modify that list and turn it into a selector for folks and let them like opt into some saved query, right? Because we don't have those yet, but saved queries.
Yeah. But I can see, I see the value in having that be a shared list, right? Like people can just reach out to.
Well, that's where saved queries would come into it, right? Like if we haven't explored this enough, but we have saved queries in the GUI today. We don't have saved queries at the project level, and we don't have query references in the query selector syntax today. It was something we talked about years ago when I first introduced it into NPM, and then when we first brought it here. We haven't really talked about it a lot, but yes, like the idea of like having almost like a variable referencing a saved query or like a pre-defined query would make a lot of sense, I think, so that you could shorten the,
Could we potentially have community shared queries, right? Like
I think this is something Wes has talked about many years ago. He talked about Netflix or some other organization being willing to maintain a list of known what was it, known packages for some reason, known either good or bad packages, and he was just having the thought that it would be great that people could host lists or whatever, that if you want to, like similar to like ES lint standards from like Airbnb's like ES lint standards, like that was almost like a company hosting their standards and everybody consumed them and we're like, these are good, I want my project to abide by these standards. Great. If there was a way to share essentially, lists, I think that would be great, or share queries, I think that'd be great. That's something that would be super powerful. I don't know how we would do it, whether the expectation would be they would have to be published as a package, or like how are they consumed and how are they merged with project level saved queries or user level saved queries. It becomes like a config question, like how do we want to basically merge these lists of queries. But I do think it's super powerful if you could, in your package JSON event, be able to write a key, which is the name of the variable or whatever, and then the selector. It'd simplify like the language quite significantly. Or
should the first step to having a client not install scripts by default, is it a first step that we interactively ask the user for confirmation? We could print the list of
the Dino strategy.
Yeah,
I think people both were. The sentiment I got, and this is anecdotal, so I don't know if they polled users or if they did a lot of user testing and decided to go with the strategy they went with. I have heard a lot of people find it annoying. I personally have found it annoying, and what ends up happening is, at least for me personally, is I do an allow all just to run.
But
And
that's
it's
the thing, right? Like you as a user, you want to get your project running. Like the end user don't care about all the details. We care about it. We're building the package manager and everything around it, right? Like so that's where my mind goes. Like how
well,
do
it's
we
about giving
solve that?
people the options. If you don't have the option to even give them, that's why I think people are frustrated with NPM right now, is that they don't have that. To circle back to what we were talking about first, not having a relative before config, the fact that there's just no way to do that easily, I think people are most frustrated by that. And everybody's giving PMPM praise for introducing a way to configure it, right? So it's like, it's not that you even have to change your defaults necessarily, but if you can at least like opt into like the config, I think feel like people are going to be happy, right?
Yeah,
We,
I noticed.
as a matter of taste, we get to decide what we think is beneficial as the default, and then provide a way for folks to change, based on their own personal preferences, change away from that, right?
Yeah.
My personal preference would be to turn off scripts by default.
Yeah.
It's been that there was such a hot topic. It's I don't know how many years old now, but in the old npm RFCs repo, we had the discussions open, and Tom Walsky, I believe, Tom Walsky, I forget is his GitHub username, who built RunKit, and I think is at Apple now, or Stripe. He was at Apple, now he's at Stripe. I think Stripe bought RunKit. He was the one that opened up that issue, saying like, let's turn off post-install scripts by default, make them opt in, have an allow list, and that everybody in the ecosystem has now commented on that issue from, I don't know, 2019 or 2020, whenever it was, and it's got hundreds of upvotes, right? So I don't think anybody would be surprised if we came out swinging and said, like, we've just refused to install these by default. And you can run a query, or you could run, the beautiful thing is, like, Luke added querying to run. So you can run in your transitive dependencies, you can run those scripts if you want post install,
Sure.
right? So
Sure. But
you could both do a query, find all those, and then do a run against all those, right?
I mean, I think we probably need an easier way to just get there, right? Like I was thinking maybe just like we have, I don't know if we have right now, but just a build script, right? Like that just runs all of these, and at the end of an install, we could just print a little message, right? Like we could print if we detect that there were packages that relied on post install scripts, we could print a little message. Oh, we noticed there some packages need building. You might need to run vault build to complete,
Yeah,
to
I'm
install
okay
these.
with that. I'm definitely okay with that, so long as that check only happens during install,
Mhm.
and that check, again, you're probably just like you're enumerating some sort of counter, like you're counting up, just like for this project does or doesn't have these scripts defined in the document. That's an easy counter. Um, we don't have to enumerate which ones do have it, because you can use the query language to figure out which ones do. We just have to have a number. I don't think we have to keep track of which ones do or don't. I think that would be. I think also what happens
Yeah,
is, like, our install gets faster, by the way,
yeah,
because
yeah. It's a nice side effect.
it's a
I
nice
like it.
side effect, right?
Yeah.
Install gets faster, and you're right. We can print essentially a warning, similar to the way that
Mm.
we're printing the number of requests we're making over time. We can print the number of packages that had install scripts, and then, like, you could print exactly what you're saying, the query to run to find them all, which would
Mhm.
be, Volt to see which ones, because you might be like surprised that even was something that had an install script. So you might want to see what it was before you actually run them, right? So I think by
Right.
taking this phased approach to it, I
Yeah.
think, like, we're educating people about their dependencies, right? Like, we're educating about like, oh, something got pulled in that actually needed an install script. Well, Volt didn't run it, but it told me that it had it, which I think is maybe
Mhm.
helpful. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I like
I
that
would be a
approach.
+1 to making that change. Um, and
Cool.
if and technically, in my mind, what a Volt build or whatever, we could bike shed the name. Um, it would just essentially shell out to Volt run, and with
I,
the
I think it's just
query.
the part of Refi that we took away from Refi, right? Like the run of the
Oh,
scripts.
you need bin
Just do
linking and
that.
stuff, right?
Need what?
Do you need bin linking and everything else? Like,
Yeah.
or
Yeah, I think so.
I think bin linking can stay. It's
It can. You're right. But some packages depend on building first. So
right. Okay. So
Yeah.
a build would do more than just run the scripts. It would do run the scripts and then do a couple of. Okay.
yeah.
I'm with you. Yeah, maybe, and calling it build too. The nice thing about our commands, our subcommand space, is that it's not shared with the ecosystem, right? So that was a good decision that we decided not to, because I'm thinking in the back of my mind, PMPM or Yarn don't have the luxury of creating a build command because they would be trampling on the ecosystem's build scripts, to find build scripts, right?
Oh, I see what you mean.
And so by like
Hmm.
a Vault build command, we would know is a safe command to introduce, because we don't have that shared subcommand space. So,
Right.
any thoughts, Luke?
No, not really.
You're probably in HTTPS or like content
Yeah,
header.
I'm working.
Okay, well, we don't have to.
I did roll my tokens though. That's what I did.
Okay, yeah. What did you do? I rolled all. I only had one token left in npm. I just, because I had blown them away most recently. Did you guys all? I guess you don't use GH. I use GH quite a lot.
No, yeah, I rolled that one too.
You
Well, but I don't
uninstalled
use.
it?
No,
Okay,
I don't use it for auth token management. I just give it a
right.
token.
Good. Yeah.
Oh.
And then I did search like our org and my GitHub account and npm account just for those. It was making those malicious repos with encrypted secrets in it or something. So I just checked. They had some naming stuff to look, and I made sure that we did have one of the affected dependencies in our tree, but I just made sure that I mean, that's one reason I did all this. But then after doing all that, just went and looked and made sure it was the safe version. We didn't have any other versions in there. We were mostly, I think I personally got protected by the lock file because I was running pnpm install, but had not updated anything that day. So I think I could have gotten owned if I had happened to be updated, but then I would have rolled tokens and stuff. But
Yeah, scary. The I mean, it just is a big reminder that we need to get to Vault policies, and then to ensure that we're using Vault ourselves. So the protection we would have had there is the minute that Socket became aware of the issue and posted essentially their to their own APIs, we would have been protected. So there's still a significant delay. And I noticed, even I was doing some testing yesterday, I noticed the Aikido malware feed that we actually have access to had notified something, like one of the top of the packages at the top of the list. I went and grabbed, and it was still on npm, and I could still grab it to go do testing. And I was like, this is both good and bad. Good because it's great, I can test out our malware selectors in a sandbox environment, which we have now, which is what I did. But also bad in the sense that it's still accessible, and and it's got like hundreds of downloads or whatever. So yeah, the closer we can get to like real time gating and protection by not waiting for like CVEs or takedowns, protecting by like obviously a company like Socket that's like doing real time analysis, that the better for us, right? Like I'd feel better if we were using Vaults to install Vaults, our dependencies, and then we have essentially the malware gate turned on by default, right? So there's also the opportunity, which I think I backlogged an issue for, is to put that socket gate in VSR itself. So if we're using VSR as a proxy, or are consuming essentially via VSR, consuming the ecosystem via VSR, then we can essentially gate packages that way. So we can do it at the client, and if we can do it in the registry as well, I think that's like two key pieces we have to ship very quickly here. So in that vein, what's your thoughts on policies and or updating modifiers to support the selector syntax? Because I know, Roy, you're primarily the one that's going to be looking at this.
So this is a question to me.
It is. I mean, because what's on the roadmap in terms of ensuring that peer dependency resolution is all looking good. I think you could maybe, like, all these questions are basically being proposed to you, like the turning off install scripts by default. That could be a thing that quickly helps.
Yeah.
That's like one big win, and
I think
the lift is more minimal, maybe.
Yes, that one is definitely less of have it. Luke, sorry, if you can just mute. I think there's some sound returning from.
Oh yeah, I'm typing.
Yeah. Right. Thank you. Yeah. No, but what I was thinking that yes, the scripts I think is something we should do as soon as possible, right? Like I think like we should backlog maybe after peer dApps are done, right? We should get to it, right? Like it's a quick win, and if we want to have that from the start, right? Like when we have version 1.0 here, I think we should do that as soon as possible, right?
Cool. Okay.
Yeah. And so that's a simple one. Now policies and the rest of like modifiers, right? Like
policies could be modifiers. So and Luke might have a different opinion on this because I think he did when we talked in the summer, or I forget when we last talked about this. Or we're speccing out modifiers. In general, we initially had them, I think, consolidated. We kind of basically said like a modifier basically could be treated as a policy, but there's certain things that you might want to do with the policy that isn't like specifically what a modifier does. A modifier is like swap this for that. And so like a good example is the relative dates that everybody's asking for, right? I look at that as like, if we add a relative date selector to the DSS, why wouldn't I be able to use that selector as the replacement for a modifier, right? Instead of a spec. So let's say I look up and I find I use a relative date, or I don't use a relative date. I say pound React. So any version of React, or I just do star. Every package, I want to essentially only resolve to relative packages that are, or relative versions that are a week or so old, or older than a week. Were published a week or older. I could use that new relative selector, pseudo selector in the value, or the idea would be that I could use it as the value.
I mean, I see how you use it in the key, but how do you use it in the value?
So in the key, and I might have mentioned this in a thread somewhere, the key today is treated like a many, like a selector. It will select many things. It will select anything. The value has to resolve to a single thing, right?
It's a spec, right? Like the value is a spec.
Well, let's forget the fact what it is today, but it has to resolve to one thing, right?
Right.
Has to resolve to one thing, which is like the package. It's going to resolve to the version. Now it's implied that the spec is going to be relative to to that package's name and origin and all this other stuff. Like we create essentially a full spec, like a full like lookup location and everything else, right? Because right now you could give it an explicit version, but I could have queried for 20 different dependencies. So I say I can do in the key today, I could say hash react comma hash Lodash, right? Is that not supported today?
No, say it again. In the value.
In the value here, I'll show you an example of
Yeah,
what.
yeah. Type in an example. It's going to be easier to see.
So if I had I'll do a more realistic case.
Right. So the value here.
Does this work? I forget.
It should. Yes. It should. I'm not so sure about the comma. It might be
that's so this is the key. This is the crux of what I'm.
Yeah, but these are the details, the nuances of bringing the entire query language into the modifiers. It's a separate body of work, right? Like, but you're getting into the relative date. That's what I want to understand here.
Well, it's a similar kind of problem, right? So if we look at this just for a second, right? Like the idea here is that I'm setting actually the spec for two different packages. So it's actually like the value has to be
well, it's more than that, right? Like you're setting the spec for all these different edges, right? Like there might be multiple declarations of dependencies into React DOM, right? Like, and you set this example here, right? Like you're setting them all to be using 18.x instead, right?
Right. Exactly. Yes. Right. Every instance, you're right. That's a good clarification. Every instance, I could be very more explicit by saying, let's say, a bit more explicit by doing an exact lookup, which would be this. Yeah. I'll do the exact. So we're dealing with. Right. So this is only going to get the direct dependencies of React and React DOM. So it's not going to find all other instances of it. It's only going to set those direct dependencies. So, but the idea really would be to be able to do something like so. Now, I'm going to put in a human readable value here. Right?
Yeah, but from the point of view of a modifier, that's not a spec, right?
It's not a spec.
Yeah. So what is the behavior here?
It would get what I imagine it would get is it would think about how the DOM works today or how the DOM works in the browser, the DOM APIs. Like, so when I use document.query selector all, I get back a node list, a live node list. When I then iterate over those, like let's say in this case, React and React DOM as if they were elements in the DOM, iterate over that node list, I can actually then do a query selector from those nodes, essentially they become like the scope, right? So it becomes like React as a scoped element dot query selector from there using like the CSS kind of like analogy is that then I can do a query inside that element essentially or from that element. And in this case, like that would be from this edge or from, relative this edge or node. Usually we've used the term item. So from this item, let's do a relative um, query. And so published in this case would be a relative query to each one of the returned node items, or each one of the items that was returned from the key.
Yeah, but you're not operating in the items here. You kind of
It'd be like a registry.
Example. Yeah, you're kind of operating like, okay, you go look at all the specs possible for these guys.
Right.
Give me the ones that were published more than 7 days ago.
So it could be this. One sec.
We might need the host. Yeah, that's a. I think
Watch
if you
this.
bring in
Watch
the
this.
host,
Watch this. Watch this.
Then it might make more sense, right? Yeah.
So then the scope becomes a special. It becomes relative to the key. So it would, in the first, there's two lookups that happen here. One would be for React, and one would be for React DOM, right? And so like in the first iteration of this, like scope would be equivalent to :react or hash react. And I'll make this a bit simpler just so it's easier to read. So we'll go back to and instead of like, let's do something not.
But it's almost like you need a different selector. I think what you want here is to say like, okay.
I can do this 1 sec.
Maybe scope works the way you're. I'm not sure. This would be to just set the regular, like here you're just setting a regular spec.
Somewhat. I'm not. Specs are a subset of the query selector syntax, right? Because today we can define all of those details in a selector using the v or semver pseudo function, right? So in this case, that's what I've done with the v. I've said I would want the in range v10 version of React and React DOM here from npm.
Yeah. But this is a wild departure from regular specs.
So, I mean, what people want right now is they want that relative.
And I mean, this is not going to be super performant, right? Like you're having to look up into the registry, fetch, fetch all this data. Performance is not going to be the selling point of this, which might be fine for But I still think, we if we want to do delayed installs, we should probably just have a config for it, right? We already have.
This
before,
would be
right.
Just to show you. This is what that's.
No, but this is that's what I'm trying to say. Like this is not performant at all. This is going to be super slow.
I thought you had.
And so,
I thought you had like some breakthrough, some crazy night like last week where you're like, oh my gosh, I figured out how to make modifiers super fast on both the key and the. You had, I'm gonna go
not
back
really.
in our Slack message and find when you went full Doc Brown and you were having like your time traveling moment. But you said something about the improving the performance of.
Well,
Um,
yeah, it might have been related to the keys, but the
yeah.
thing is that now we have two lookups here, one for the keys, one for
I'm
building
very
the right,
aware. I'm very
right?
aware of that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, what I'm saying, and this is looks like a big lift, right? Like to land this thing.
So on the value side, think
Yeah,
about it this way. We have to start supporting registry querying. Or we've promised
yeah.
in a recent
It's
blog
in our
post.
roadmap. Let's put it that way. It's in our roadmap.
So it's coming.
Yes.
So it's coming. Registry querying is coming, which means if I can query the registry with the same syntax I can query my projects, this would be, in my opinion, the most holistic experience for me to write a policy, like a policy or a modifier using this.
Yeah.
Now we can keep like what
Yeah.
you could say, which is totally, you can say this, and I think it's totally accurate to say, okay, this is going to be, there might be some performance hits. Okay, this might take us a bit of time to get to because it's tough. It's a tough API to like make happen. But looking at this, I'm like, is this not the most powerful mechanism to protect and or write policies?
It is definitely the most powerful. It is definitely a bazooka. You can do like a lot of things with that. So it is. I think it is. You know,
Because the
something
concern
we
is
want.
recreating a patchwork of config. That's where I'm like the patchwork of config is where you end up with like these concessions where then you're like, well, sometimes this flag will overwrite that flag. Oh, sometimes this will touch that. Oh, actually, it works for this command. It doesn't work for this command. And so that's where my concern is with us introducing. Let's say we just said we're going to do exactly what PMPM did and do a minimum release age
By the
config.
way, Barry just shipped the same thing. So like, wait.
That's okay. I mean, I think that's okay. That's totally okay.
No,
Yarn and Barry have
it's
very
just,
similar
yeah, but
configs.
I just think there is consensus that the community wants this now
Sure.
because with socket, like like all of these guys catching up earlier the malware, you kind of want that delayed install by default, right? Like most, I think it is something we would kind of be advising people to, right?
So what is it to me? A delayed install is just a set of gating features. One and gating properties. One is the time of the publish, right? So that's a piece of metadata, right? That I should be able to query for, right? And that's not that, and that's information I would want to write policies around, no matter what. And two, it's the relative like date from until, like that's something that we don't have, which was
but that's more like a user level type of library helper that gets you
it's
there.
something that it becomes hydrated when you run the when it's again, it's like a relative date that is a feature of whatever.
Yeah.
So I feel like with the second thing, i.e. that relative date, we could add that to the selector syntax today.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we probably should go add it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Find me any packages that were published within the last, I mean, like we only have, I could manually put the date in because we have the publish selector, but let's add the relative values.
Relative values to publish, like the example here, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. That's easy to see, easy to implement.
Yeah.
But yeah. Because I think like my concern is, aren't we changing the patchwork of configured flags by, this haystack of queries that are going to be everywhere, and you're going to be trying to look where the needle is, and it's going to be, potentially, it's a trade-off, right? Like at the end, and might not be the best one for, when talking about this very specific use case, right?
I agree, I guess, and disagree. Like I feel like it's a more holistic way to um, uh, operationalize metadata, dependency metadata, right? And with enough time, I think everybody will see that the patchwork is more problematic than an expressive language that has all the like there's always nuance, right? Every time we've talked to customers or talked to users, they always have nuance that isn't accommodated by one config or another. And it happens to be around some property or piece of metadata that we didn't account for. Whether it's like, I only want to do this allow list for this type of license project, or this authored project, or the name, specific name of a project, right? So already what you're seeing is what was implemented by PNPM and Yarn, and even NPM way back in the day. It actually only applies to a subset of the dependencies anyways, right? It only applies to registry dependencies. It does not apply to Git dependencies. It does not apply to remote deps, right? So there's already like an implied,
Right.
like there's like a false sense of security that people have today. And so I think that we bubble up kind of the nuance of the dependency graph and all the metadata that is nuanced within the dependency graph by creating this, or leaning into the selector language, right? Because then we say, well, for registry deps, you can gate them based on their publish time, right? Or for registry deps that are named X, Y, and Z, right? So you get that nuance because eventually somebody's going to ask for, why can't I only gate this to a subset of my packages, not the bazooka that is minimum? Because like right now it's a bazooka against all registry deps. Somebody's going to say, can I get an allow list? Not just for my ignore scripts, but can I get an allow list to the publish time, right? So this is where I say, like, it's a patchwork of config, and every time like there's something a problem like this, we kind of create a new config that creates a new patchwork of issues or like nuance. So like I would push back against creating a one-off flag for install. I'm okay if they're like, I'm okay if we decide that modifiers are modifiers, and we have a section for modifiers, and then we have a section for policies, and they happen to use the selector syntax as well. But in both cases, there's going to be two lookups if we think that policies will support the selector syntax. So what your pushback about the performance angle to it, where it's like, oh, there's going to be two lookups here. It's like, well, that's going to happen anyways if policies at all are going to use the selector language. It's how it gets implemented. Like, can we make it efficient? Like, can we, it's definitely a technical problem for, can we make it efficient?
Yeah.
Because the metadata should be there no matter what, right? We would need to get the before, or we'd need to get the timestamps out of the document and check them, and we would need to install all those dependencies, or as we're installing all those dependencies, be checking that metadata. So
yeah, there's definitely a lot to digest.
I think it kind of goes hand in hand with modifiers, which is why I brought it up. and why we
Right.
thought, because it's like
Where we can see its usage.
as you're essentially modifying, or as you're applying modifiers, why not essentially introduce like this ability to gate basically on certain keys or whatever, or not gate, but find a different value other than like what specs are just limited. They're just limited.
Yeah. This would be about finding values from.
So take this as a modifier, right?
Oh, by the way, I think we're past the hour, so.
Oh yeah,
we should
apologies.
probably wrap up. No worries. Right.
Or
then,
is
yeah,
is this a default policy? You know, like it doesn't matter where it is.
For a policy, yes, makes total sense. Yeah, but I can see like as modifiers, like stacking all of these together, right?
So let's just say we took it in time, like because the concern is, and I'll take like maybe 5 minutes more of your time just to show you how, if we only add the selector syntax to the keys, right, which is currently on our roadmap, is to add selector syntax to the keys of modifiers, and we have the support for essentially removing. We have no other option for someone to potentially avoid malware but still get a good version of that piece of software. This is where specs are limited, because they only are about versions, right? They only are versions and disk tags, right? That's but we have, so actually you would have seen in this past week, I actually added to our backlog that we have a missing disk tag selector, right? There's no way to match selectors by disk tags.
Right. Disk tag. Is it a selector, or should it be just a part of that spec selector? We were kind of specking out of some.
I think it should be disk, because it's going to be like, there's going to be like latest, there's going to be disk that, or there's going to be next or something, or nightlies or whatever, for disk tags. I think if it's
right, but I remember the whole idea was that the spec selector would kind of break down the properties of a parsed spec, so you could also match like on the type, right? Okay, so if the type is a disk tag, then you could match on that.
No, what I'm suggesting with that disk tag is whether or not it matches relative to that time you run it. So let's say if I run this query today and I say, find me all the packages that are disk tagged latest, it's essentially the inverted version of outdated. It's the inversion of like :outdated. So like think of it this way, right? So like it's a real-time selector, not necessarily a spec driven selector. So the spec driven selector is like something that's static, whereas this would be relative. So it's again relative to the point in time that you run it, because we'd have to fetch the pacument, or like check the pacument to see if the version of that of the resolved node is equivalent to, let's say, that disk tag. So it's kind of like an outdated selector in that you have to do a bit of work to get it to work. So the reason why I bring this up, though, is because like right now, the only option we have with modifiers, which if they could become like policies, or what they would have to do to adapt and be like policies, is, and if we don't want to do that, we don't want to cross the streams, as the Ghostbusters would say. We don't want to cross the streams. That's fine. We can keep them two separately, but we're going to have to basically run policies at the same time we would run modifiers anyways, which is why I think it might make sense to merge these. What you see here today with this eventual key that is going to be available to us, like if we add this next after peer deps, we add support for all of DSS and modifiers, then you'll be able to find malware and remove it but you won't be able to replace it with anything. So your project's going to be broken. And potentially I had got compromised as a maintainer, and somebody got access to my keys and they published a bad version of my very popular package. I might still have very good versions going back, for 10 years, right? And so it doesn't just make the entire potential, all those other packages as malware, right? Like, so,
Right.
and it shouldn't leave a hole essentially in my depth graph by essentially removing that with nothing.
No, right. Like the malware, it applies to the package at specific
Right.
version.
And if I only had specs or this dash available to me as
Mhm.
options to essentially do something about it,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
it's not as good as being able to be like, help me find a better known good
Like
version,
go to the same registry, like column host, go to that same registry, get that package, and not malware.
and not malware.
So it picks a version that is not that
Or the
malware.
beautiful thing about this is you can do more interesting replacements, right? So you
Mhm.
could go like, because you would have selectors at the selector syntax on in the value, you could do a more interesting selector swap, or like a swap of or change of the
Yeah.
yeah.
But I'm not so sure it should be that much of a fundamental piece, like, because at the end of the day, like a good UX for handling this could be, you know, a good UI that will help the user select the previous version that did not had malware on it and just apply to their modifiers, right? Like still a static.
Well, we're still
stack,
talking about
right?
stuff that nobody should really see. I don't think that anybody should be writing really like a lot
Mm.
of stuff like overrides as by hand.
Somebody's gonna have to put that in place at some point, right? Like that initial
Well,
modifier.
we would encourage. Oh, we would encourage folks to like essentially be using the UI to generate
Yeah.
interactive like
Yeah.
application of this config is definitely like on Jason's roadmap. I know, like that's why we added like the new sort table to like search results, right? So that we can do bulk actions. So. Well, I apologize that we ran so far over, but I appreciate you guys jumping on and talking about this. I think there's a number of things that we gotta like, queue up here, but also get to fixing. It sounds like maybe we agree the most immediate one we could do is that create a brand new build command and kill install scripts by default.
Yeah, I think that's a very good one to start with.
Okay. Luke, do you have any like pushback on that? If we were to like queue that up as a after peer deps?
Yeah. Oh, that sounds good.
Cool. Okay. I will talk to you folks async. And thank you again for jumping on. We'll talk soon.
Awesome. See you next time. Bye.